stroke 28 of the wheel. Today, Jenny and I are going to be talking about transitions as we enter the time of the year when new life is beginning to stir. I'll also touch on colours and their meanings. And we have our first ever international guest, Christian Reifsteck. He is the founder of Standing Stones Healing Company. He currently teaches in Pennsylvania. He plays a variety of instruments, including the bodhran, the tin whistle, banjo, ukulele, and Native American flute. And he's a certified Reiki master.
It's hello from me. As we are transitioning from Yule into Imbolc, I am always excited to look out for those very first stirrings of springtime. Often it is still icy and cold, but Friday afternoon I distinctly saw a golden orb in the sky, and I'm fairly sure that it was the sun. That sun that was reborn at Yule is getting that little bit stronger and promising lengthening days and light and warmth returning. And while the earth may be frozen and there is still a chance of frost and snow, the land is beginning to quicken. At Yule, I celebrated the silence within the sacred pause, and I enjoyed moments of introspection with the grandmothers and the mothers of air. Imbolc can be a much more riotous affair. The maidens are returning, just as snowdrops and crocuses are bringing colour and cheer into our lives.
The properties of crystals and herbs, etc., in magic often evolved in relation to their colour. Colour has a big effect on our moods and emotions. Think of rainbows, their beauty and how they symbolise hope to us, joining the earth to the heavens. People paint rooms blue to create a relaxing space, whereas red is not for use in cardiac units in hospitals because it is full of energy that increases blood pressure. In UK folklore, red is not surprisingly associated with blood, and green is the fairies' colour, and of course, not forgetting the green man. So for pagans, colours can be used in rituals or seasonal celebrations to evoke the properties or energies associated with the colour and to prompt its magical response. The white, red and black colours of the triple goddess owe a lot to Robert Graves in his book The White Goddess. According to Graves, the moon trinity means the new moon is the white goddess of birth and growth, the full moon, the red goddess of love and battle, the old moon, the black goddess of death and divination. So, to this time of year, for me, the colours of Imbolc are associated with what I see outside when the first snowdrops or bright yellow crocuses are flowering. Fresh green shoots appear. There's a hint that the nights are just getting a little lighter, and the energy of the earth can first be felt stirring. So for me, white, yellow and green. It's quite easy to find white candles and to decorate the altar with white flowers, although it's much better to leave snowdrops in the garden where they belong and buy some white flowers. If there's room, try adding quartz crystals, white stones, or anything that sparkles. But more commonly, the colours are white, red, orange and yellow. These colours are often added to an Imbolc altar in the forms of candles, as candles are a traditional decoration for this Sabbath. All the traditional colours for Imbolc correspond to fire. A yellow candle can symbolise the sun returning. The half fire is sacred to Brigid, the goddess associated with Imbolc, and as is her altar in every home. Brigid is sometimes called the triple goddess for her fires of the hearth, inspiration and the forge. At this time of year, fire was more important than ever. But having said all that about colours, I wanted to mention that the association of colours can be complicated. They're often based on our own cultural and personal understanding. They are not fixed or even common to all, and the meanings change depending upon the circumstance in which they are used. But finally, let's go back to the white snowdrop, one of my favourite flowers. I think it's good to see it as a symbol of hope. It has great strength that can inspire us. Think about this. This small, delicate, beautiful flower forces its way through frozen earth. Despite adversity, there is still a season of joy, beauty, and rest to come.
Oh, that was really interesting. And I think you raised a really valid point there about personalising your colour correspondences. And I'm not much of a gardener. I'm getting there and I'm doing a little bit more each year. But I was looking up crocuses, and what I didn't realise, and loads of people might know this, is that crocuses actually need between 9 and 15 weeks in the frozen earth to be able to germinate, which I just thought was really, really interesting. So moving on, I'm going to be talking a little bit about transitions. So Imbolc marks the transition from winter to spring, and many people associate this time of year with the goddess Brigid. And she's a goddess that knows a lot about change. Often known as the goddess of 1,000 names, she's Brigid, Brigid, Bride, Bridie, Brigid. She hints at the promise of renewal and the earth awakening. Imbolc means in the belly, and Olmec means ewe's milk. Soon we will see the signs of fertility returning, and ewes begin lactating in readiness for spring lambs. So much of this time is held in potential. In agrarian cultures, this ability to drink sheep's milk and make cheese would have been crucial to sustaining people between winter and spring. Brigid also transitioned from pagan goddess to the Christian Saint Brigid, and she's a bridge between both. In Christian tradition, she is the foster mother of Christ, and the Obod website comments on her evolution. In order to incorporate Brigid into Christian worship and thus ensure her survival, her involvement in the life of Jesus became the stuff of legend. According to the stories in the lives of the saints, Brigid was the midwife present at his birth, placing 3 drops of water on his forehead. This seems to be a Christianized version of an ancient Celtic myth concerning the Son of Light, upon whose head 3 drops of water were placed in order to confer wisdom. Further, as a Christianized saint, Brigid was said to be the foster mother of Jesus, fostering being a common practice among the Celts. She took the child to save him from the slaughter of male infants, supposedly instigated by Herod, and she wore a headdress of candles to light their way to safety. So just as she's a goddess of many names, she is also the patron of many arts. She's the goddess of healing, poetry, smithcraft, fire and harp. Brigid is a solar deity, but she also incorporates water, and there are many healing wells that are dedicated to her. Imbolc is a liminal time. The crones of winter have not quite given up their dominion, and there are many stories that emphasise the link between the Cailleach and Bride. And in some stories, the Cailleach keeps Bride hostage, and in others, Cailleach drinks from the fountain of youth and becomes Bride. Again, there is a lot of scholarly research that suggests, like there is not one Brigid, it is also fair to say that the Cailleach is more likely a collection of stories, and many are rooted in geographical areas. A blogger, Talis, comments, the Cailleach is a more complex figure, and it is probably more accurate to say the Cailleachs. They belong to a group of local spirits or deities that share the same name, Cailleach, or other epithets associated with her, along with more localised names. Legends dealing with the Cailleach tend to pin her very firmly to specific localities, and generally portray her as being representative of a more sinister and devouring aspect of nature, especially those associated with storms and bad weather. And this weather law is also reflected in the belief that the weather at Imbolc portends the length of winter. If Imbolc is fair, it is believed that we are in for a long winter, and Nancy Langston comments, if the goddess Kaliak wishes to make winter last a lot longer, she will make sure that the weather on Imbolc is bright and sunny, so she can gather plenty of firewood. But if Imbolc is a day of foul weather, it means the Kaliak is asleep and winter is almost over. And we tend to experience time in a linear fashion. We're born, we mature, we die. However, I think as pagans, we experience time more cyclically. And another aspect of the maiden goddesses is that we get the opportunity to return to our maiden selves and enjoy reconnection and reunion with our inner child. And I think the gifts that the maiden goddesses bring us at this time of year are creativity, poetry, innocence, laughter, playfulness, healing, quickening, and transformation.
I think it's really interesting that Brigid is the goddess of blacksmiths as well. It's quite a sort of a full-on thing, but I suppose it's that craft of fire and creativity that I like. I also like the fact that if you've got a hearth, then effectively you've got an altar to Brigid. I think she's a lot more prevalent in our lives than maybe I first realised.
I liked what you said about the three fires, the fires of inspiration, the fire of the hearth, and the fire of the smithy. So that was a really interesting thing from you.
Thank you. I think also about the cyclical nature of life, because this Imbolc, I'm actually going to be going to a funeral, and it's sad and it's a long life, I think well led, but it just reminds us of that is the nature of things. I think the Bible always puts it best, although I wouldn't normally say that, which is in the midst of life we are in death. It's just a natural part of life. And so I'll go to a funeral, I'll celebrate this life, and then come home to where hopefully we'll see the spring starting to come back and the snowdrops emerging from the earth. Today it's a first for us. We have our very first international guest from the USA, brought to you by the miracle of the interweb. It's Christian of the Standing Stones Healing Company. Welcome, Christian, and thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
Oh, thank you so much, Hazel. Thank you both to Jenny and Hazel for inviting me on. I am so excited to be here. I love your podcast, love the wheel, and so it's a great honor. Thank you for inviting me.
It's lovely to have you on the show today, Christian.
So, Christian, could you start off by telling us a little bit about your particular path?
Yes, thank you so much. So I was raised Catholic, very Catholic. And, round about the time you are in college, you are a young adult, you question your beliefs, you question your upbringing. And so while I was in college, had a group of friends who identified as pagan, and I fell in with them and got introduced to crystals, tarot, a very nature-centered kind of way of being, and it really resonated with me, and I enjoyed it very much. While I was in college, I had a dream about my spiritual path. And in this dream, I was standing in front of a long corridor, a long hallway with doors on either side. And each door represented a religion. And as I walked down the corridor, I would stop at the particular door. And, I had just come from the Catholic door. And I said, well, I've just come from this one. I know what's behind that door. And I stood in front of another door, and it was Presbyterian. And I said, oh, that doesn't feel like a good fit for me. And I came to the Buddhism door and I paused a little bit and I said, is this it? But no, it didn't feel right. So I kept on going down the hall until I reached the Native American door. And when I stood in front of the Native American door and turned the knob and opened it, it was full of white light. And that's when the dream ended. It was a very powerful dream. Now, there's no one quote unquote Native American religion. What we call Native American is comprised of numerous tribes who all have their own belief system. But what really binds them is a very natured center way of being. And so from there, I went and I was doing spells. I had a little spell book and I was doing spells particularly for the weather and for love. I was trying to find a girlfriend. It didn't work, but I was really becoming very invested in a nature-centered way of being in the world. And that's really where I am right now. I don't particularly identify as, quote, pagan, although what really draws me to that huge category of pagan is that nature-centered way of being. I really, because of Catholicism, have a great love of ritual, a great love of incense, Gregorian chant, and those kinds of things. And so that is also a part of my spiritual path. But I believe that I am a very pagan, non-pagan. So I actually consider myself to be paganish. And if someone else called me pagan, I would be okay with that. But I personally don't label my spirituality and identify as any one thing at this time. Who knows? Life is a journey. And so I may identify as something solidly at some point in the future, but I'm very happy being a person who incorporates aspects of all kinds of religions and spiritual paths. So thank you.
That's fascinating. So this is a time of year that a lot of us think of the goddess Brigid, and fantastic goddess, isn't she? She does bridge that Catholicism and those pagan beliefs in such an amazing way. And it's a time of year that we associate with transitions and healing. And I know that you're a Reiki master. So how do you think that these practices have formed a part of your path?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. We are always in transition as human beings, and I think that maybe we don't always recognize that to the extent that we can. Meaning that life is change. Life is a great wheel, as you know, with the Wheel podcast. And so we are always growing. We are always dying. Things are always growing and dying within us. And so I believe that, the way that my path has unfolded is just a deep appreciation of the inherent transitions of our lives. And one of the things that I really appreciate about being a Reiki master is using Reiki specifically to assist with transitions. When we go through a life transition, whether it's a huge transition or a small transition, we can experience a whole range of feelings and emotions, particularly discomfort. We as human beings don't always like change. We like to be comfortable. And so using something like Reiki can be really helpful for us in those life transitions to help us heal and grow and move on as part of the process. I think it's also very important to recognize that healing, growing, letting go is all very much a process.
Christian, do you think poetry, music, healing have brought you on a journey to explore Ireland and Brigid?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Absolutely, without a doubt. I very much St. Brigid's Shrine in Western Ireland and County Clare is actually my favorite place on earth. And I personally believe that it is what my insides look like, because here is this space, this holy well, which I adore holy wells, this holy well where people have been coming for years and years and years, bringing their favors for Brigid, bringing their prayers, bringing their mementos, and seeking favor and asking for blessings, and also honoring her and honoring the sacred waters, which is absolutely a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so, yes, I love that spot on earth. It's an amazing place. And it really is a place where there is just a great feeling of peace and a great feeling of tranquility. You know, I actually once had a dream several years ago, this has been quite a few years now. I once had a dream that the shrine, St. Brigid's Shrine, had been plowed over, and I had gone back there to visit, and the whole site was plowed over. It was just dirt and rubble, and even the water itself was gone. And so to me, it's just such a spiritual place for me, that for that dream, that signaled to me that something was going on with me spiritually that I needed to consider and really explore. But I really love the idea of the holy well itself, and how the holy well is so much this space that really is a welling up from the earth of power and life. And I think that for us, our own spirituality can be seen as a holy well. You know, it's this deep source within us, this deep reservoir of power that is under the ground, underneath us, that we might not even realize until we find this springing forth of the life from the ground. And I really feel that that's the way it is for all of us, with the untapped power that we have inside of us that we might not realize until one time, whoops, there it is. It's springing forth, bursting out of the ground, quite literally. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to recognize and harness that, and give thanks and praise to it as well. So Hazel, you know, as far as a spiritual journey for me, yes, absolutely. And part of that path for me is just giving thanks and praise for that creative energy that flows through all of us.
That's a beautiful way of looking about it, as our insides being no more or no less sacred than the environments and the places where, you know, people have trod before us. So you mentioned a little bit earlier about having a spell book and doing some spells. So what kind of books have helped you on your way, Christian?
Great. Well, thank you. So I am currently reading right now Stations of the Sun by Ronald Hutton. So this is, of course, quite a book. It's very dense, very packed, and fascinating as well. So I am currently making my way through that. I also have really resonated with the Book of Runes by Ralph Bloom. It's also one of my favorite books that I have enjoyed reading and I cherish. I actually was first introduced to this book when I was in high school by my teacher, my English teacher, who copied pages of this from us and introduced us to it, which is a wonderful thing for a high school teacher to do. And then last book I'm going to mention is Finding Sanctuary in Nature. And this is simple ceremonies in the Native American tradition for healing yourself and others. And it's by Jim Pathfinder Ewing.
And we'll put links to all of those books into the show notes for you.
Thank you.
I know you very kindly put together a seed blessing ritual along with some of your poetry in a video for our listeners, and we'll put a link in the show notes to it. There's an amazing idea that for a seed to express itself, it must crack and become completely open. What does that mean to you?
Thank you, Hazel, very much for that question. Yes, absolutely. You know, I really believe that the seed, before it springs forth, must feel some discomfort. You know, it must be uncomfortable in the shape that it is in. Otherwise, it would not be exerting the pressure in order to open itself and spring forth in life. There's this great phrase in Irish, Eekbora, and Eekbora means, Eekbora is the idea of this quivering just before life springs forth. So it's the idea that just before there's a springing forth of life, there's a shaking that happens, and that is Eekbora. So, you know, before the seed bursts forth, it quivers, it shakes, or before the bud blooms on the tree, before the new leaves open, they shake a little bit before they burst forth. And I think that Eekbora is such a wonderful way to conceptualize change and transition. You know, this idea that the seed is feeling uncomfortable, it's shaking, and it's bursting forth. And for us in our lives, change cannot occur until we, on some level, feel some discomfort, whether that's change that we initiate or change that is thrust on us, whether that is positive change or negative change. In order for change to happen, there needs to be a level of discomfort. And I think, you know, as someone who is very in tune with nature, or at least on that journey to become more and more in tune with nature as I can, to see that playing out in nature all of the time, this idea of growth and dying and healing and change. You know, we have a tendency to think that change is something that can or does or should happen overnight, that healing, for instance, is something that we should be able to be miraculously healed of our afflictions. But if we just look to nature, we can see that growth does not happen immediately. You know, the seed cracks open, it grows, it takes time for the flower to reach its fullest extent. It takes time for its blooms to open, and we can't rush that. We can't force that. And so for our own healing and for our own growth, I think it's very important for us to acknowledge and recognize that it's not the kind of thing that is going to happen overnight. So when we want to implement positive changes, for instance, when we want to transition in positive ways, and maybe we feel some frustration at ourselves for what we are not doing or the ways in which things are or are not going, I think it's very important for us to remember that the seed needs to take the time to crack open. It needs to take time to sprout its shoots, and it needs to take time to grow into a beautiful flower. So I do believe it's very important for us to remember that. If I may, ladies, I would love to actually read a poem about Eekbora and St. Brigid's Shrine. I'm going to read for you from my book, Turning Turf. It's a book of poems and photographs from Ireland. And this one is called Eekbora. The water that flows from St. Brigid's Well in West Clare sprang forth once after the earth had quivered for some time. For some time before the faithful lit candles and the hopeful prayed, and planets and stars moved through space. Once, this whole everything was nothing. Not an earth, not a galaxy, just a long, nebulous wisp, a great shivering in the dark. And for me, I think that in a sense, the universe is contained in Eekbora, and the universe is contained in St. Brigid's Well. Brigid's Well, St. Brigid's Shrine. And for me, the universe is contained in every single one of us, in this idea that, you know, planets and stars all came from the same place, and we all came from the same place. And when you really think about it, it's just absolutely miraculous and awe-inspiring and just incredible. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Christian. Just even listening to you there, and how expansive and how much growth and how much potential there is inside each and every one of us was really beautiful, really moving. So thank you so much for coming on today. And I'm just really grateful, because I think without the podcast and Hazel and I putting ourselves out there, we probably never would have had this opportunity to connect and have this beautiful conversation with you. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, ladies. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here. And I would like to honor you and the wheel and your listeners with the seed blessing ceremony that I created and put together, especially for the wheel and especially for the wheel's listeners, to help us prepare to transition into this time of activity, transition into a time of growth and opportunity. So thank you both so much. It is an honor and a pleasure.
So goodbye from me. There's a link in the show notes to Christian's beautiful seed blessing ceremony that he's done especially for listeners of the wheel. And it also includes some of his lovely poetry, flute playing, and some rune and card readings. Please also come over to our Facebook page to join in a discussion about seasonal transitions, the colours you associate with Imbolc, and the maiden goddesses associated with spring.
Goodbye from me. And just to say that Christian's book, Turning Turf, is available from Shanty Arts Press. Please join us next week for another edition of The Wheel.